What would you do if one day your own children sat around the dinner table and said, "We'll manage your finances for you. Mom, you don't need that much. Just sign here"? Would you start to doubt yourself? Would you stay quiet and endure it? Or would you fight back, silently, wisely, with the very clarity they thought you'd lost? I've come across many heartbreaking stories of mothers being taken advantage of. But today's story is something else. A quiet, aching wake-up call. Because it all began with a whisper. A 6-year-old child's innocent warning that stirred the survival instinct in her grandmother and helped her resist a plan designed to legally erase her. You're listening to Lynn Remembers, a place where real lives are honored, where every story I tell is an act of remembering and of reclaiming worth. This is the story of Iris and how she refused to be written out of the very life she built with her own hands. I've always woken before the sun. No alarm clock, no reminders. After 40 years of early mornings, coffee, ceramic spoons, and dew-drenched silence, my body simply knows when it's 5:30. I like the kitchen at that hour. Quiet, familiar, everything in its rightful place. But that morning, one small moment shifted something deep inside me. Naomi, my granddaughter, is only 6. She sat on the tall stool, holding a cracker in one hand, her voice barely more than a breeze. "Grandma," she whispered. "Mommy and Daddy said they're taking your money tonight." I froze, spoon still mid-stir, and in that second, I knew I was no longer standing in this family as a mother. I had become a resource, and they were getting ready to claim it. Because it all began with a whisper. A 6-year-old child's innocent warning that stirred the survival instinct in her grandmother and helped her resist a plan designed to legally erase her. You're listening to Lynn Remembers, a place where real lives are honored, where every story I tell is an act of remembering and of reclaiming worth. This is the story of Iris and how she refused to be written out of the very life she built with her own hands. The kettle let out a soft whistle just as my hand reached for the mugs. The morning light hadn't yet broken through the window panes, but I didn't need it to know it was 5:30. After 4 decades of rising before the birds, my body still obeyed its own rhythm. The house was quiet, peaceful, the way I had come to cherish. I moved through the kitchen by instinct, 2 scoops of coffee, a splash of oat milk, the familiar sound of the ceramic spoon tapping gently against my favorite cup. I didn't hear Naomi's footsteps. She was always light on her feet, more whisper than child. When I turned around, there she was, already perched at the edge of the kitchen stool, her little legs swinging gently under her dinosaur pajamas. "Grandma," she said in a hushed voice. "Mommy and Daddy said they're taking your money tonight." My hand stopped mid-stir. The air felt suddenly heavier, as if the walls had shifted. I gave her a calm, practiced smile, the kind you wear when you don't want a child to know you're afraid. "That's a silly thing to say. Sweetheart, what do you mean?" She shrugged and reached into the cracker jar without much concern. "I don't know. I was supposed to be asleep. But they were downstairs talking. Daddy said you didn't need all your money. Mommy said she'd help you." I crouched down beside her and brushed a curl from her forehead. "You didn't dream this?" "Nope," she replied, as if it were nothing. I was hiding under the blanket, but I could hear everything. Then she started munching again, like she hadn't just cracked my world open with 12 tiny words. I stood slowly, my hand steadying against the counter. My heart pounded too loudly for someone who hadn't even moved. Naomi finished her cracker and skipped off toward the living room, humming as if the morning had never changed. I poured the coffee, though I no longer wanted it. The bitterness rising in my throat wasn't from the roast. By the time Celeste came gliding in, heels already clicking, phone already glued to her hand, I had tucked my fear into a quiet place inside me. She moved through the kitchen like it belonged to her, dropped her dry cleaning receipt on the counter without a word, and opened the fridge while still tapping a message with her other hand. I passed her the travel mug I had already filled. She took it without looking at me. "Can you pick up Naomi from school today?" she asked, finally glancing up. "Vincent has a client dinner and I'm showing 2 properties." I nodded, the way I always had. "Of course. "You're the best," she said with a distracted smile. Then disappeared out the front door with that careful click she always used when she was late. I leaned against the sink and stared out the window. The garden still held Robert's shape, raised beds, neat borders, the quiet pride of a man who'd built something with his hands the year after he retired. We had planned on 20 more springs. We only got 2. After he passed, everything shifted, not all at once, but in small, quiet pieces. I had 3 children, all grieving, none of them ready. I sold the cabin. I paid off Vincent's credit cards when Celeste said they were having a tight month. She never liked the word debt. I let Deidre move into the garage apartment, just for a little while. That was 6 years ago. When Celeste started her real estate business. She needed help with a down payment. I wrote the check without question. Robert would have said yes, and that was enough for me. I paid for Naomi's preschool, then her kindergarten, then her music classes. Each time, it felt right, like extended mothering. But somewhere along the way, the thank yous stopped. Then the asking stopped too. Now, it was just assumed I'd cover groceries if the account ran low. That I'd keep the house, just in case someone needed it again. That I'd always be here, just quietly off to the side. I rinsed the mugs, still warm, and wiped down the counters. I heard Naomi giggle from the living room. Closer, behind a barely open guest room door. I caught the low murmur of voices. I hadn't meant to stop. I was on my way to take fresh towels upstairs when I paused, because something in Vincent's clipped. Lowered voice froze me in place. "She's not getting any younger. Have you ever felt like the people you love most quietly stopped seeing you?" If what you're hearing hits close to home, I invite you to stay with me through this story, and consider subscribing to Lynn Remembers, where every voice, especially those often forgotten, is finally heard. "She's not getting any younger," he said. "If we don't step in now, she might waste everything." Celeste responded, her voice coated in the kind of soft concern that can cut deeper than anger. "We're not stealing from her. We're protecting her. She doesn't need that much money just sitting there. It's not safe." There was a pause, not silence, no. This was heavier than that. It was the kind of pause that fills a room, that sits in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. Then Vincent added, "And we could actually put it to use. That house is just sitting there like a vault." I stood perfectly still, the towel bundle pressed tightly against my chest, almost as if it could shield me from what I'd just heard. My heart thudded once, low, deliberate, as if it had to decide whether to break or brace itself. "Once she signs over access, it'll make everything easier," Celeste said, her tone still syrupy with false concern. "She probably won't even notice, especially if we keep it framed as support." Vincent added with casual cruelty. The towel slipped slightly in my arms, but I didn't move. I stood there, anchored, listening. I waited until their voices softened into a mumble, indistinct. Then I backed away from the door, one careful step at a time, retracing my path like someone sneaking out of a dream. Back in the kitchen, I placed the towels neatly on the chair, as if nothing had changed, and began wiping down the stove, though there was nothing to clean. My hands moved on their own, but my mind was miles away, sketching a dark line between Naomi's warning the day before and what I'd now heard with my own ears. They weren't going to ask me. They were planning around me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Not yet. What I felt instead was colder, clearer, a sense of something ancient and precise waking up inside me. A knowing, the same quiet instinct that told me when a child's fever was rising. Before the thermometer confirmed it, I could feel it. Something was coming. That night, I called Margot. She didn't say hello. She never did. Just, "What's wrong?" like she could hear the shift in my breathing. I told her everything. Naomi's whisper, the conversation behind the door, the way Celeste breezed through my presence like I was furniture, something useful. Always there, but not worth acknowledging. When I finished, there was a stillness on the other end of the line. Then her voice came through, calm, dry, sharp as ever. "They're not protecting you, Iris," she said. "They're circling you." I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came, because deep down, a quiet part of me had known it even before Naomi whispered. "Check your accounts," Margot said. "Banking, investments, Your will. Anything they ever had access to, even casually, take it back. I don't think they've taken anything yet, but they will. And they'll convince themselves it's for your own good. I sat on the edge of my bed, the receiver warm against my cheek. It's just so calculated, I whispered. Margot snorted. No, honey, it's survival. They see your savings, your house, your habits, and they're thinking long-term. You've become a safety net, Iris. And safety nets don't get asked. They get used. I swallowed hard. Celeste said something about helping me manage things. Just until I didn't want to anymore. She'll call it temporary, Margot said. Vincent will call it peace of mind. But the minute your name disappears from those documents, it's over. You'll never get it back. And I believed her, more than I believed my own hope. You need to act before they do, she said. Get a lawyer. Quietly. Don't announce anything. My eyes drifted across the room toward Robert's old writing desk, where the original will still sat, dusty, but untouched. Start there, Margot said, as if she could see exactly where I was looking. Then move fast. They're counting on your silence. The line went quiet, just long enough for me to hear the old wall clock ticking in the hall. If you've ever witnessed the slow erosion of someone's independence, or felt invisible in your own home, you know this isn't just a story, it's a warning. Subscribe to hear how this quiet resistance unfolds. Lynn remembers. The next morning, I walked to the garage apartment. Deidre was folding laundry in that quiet way of hers, the room filled with the soft scent of lemon oil and fabric softener. She looked up, startled, then her eyes dropped again, fumbling with a towel that didn't need folding. I need to ask you something, I said. She nodded too quickly. Okay. Do you know what Celeste and Vincent are planning? She paused. Not long, just enough to answer without words. The kind of pause that lets truth stand just behind the lips, waiting for permission to step forward. That kind of pause, the one where truth stands quietly behind the teeth. Waiting, hesitating, for permission to step out into the light. I took a step closer. Deidre? My voice was soft, but firm. Her lips pressed into a thin line. They said, you might need help. That you've been forgetting things. I haven't, I replied gently. I know, she whispered, her eyes still fixed on the towel in her hands. But they think, or maybe they want to believe. I waited. There's going to be a family meeting, she said at last, her voice barely above a breath. Soon, maybe this weekend. They're making it sound casual. But, she swallowed hard. They're going to ask you to sign something. Just power of attorney papers. They said, just in case. I sat down beside her on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb the neatly folded laundry. Did you agree to it? I didn't say yes, she said quickly, but I didn't say no either. I looked at her. The same neat ponytail since college. The same quiet presence that took up as little space as possible. A woman trained by years of expectation to be agreeable. Invisible. I knew that habit well. I don't want to lose them, she murmured. If I take your side, they'll freeze me out. I'm not asking you to choose sides, I said softly. I'm asking you to see clearly. Deidre looked up then, and for a moment, her eyes met mine. Behind the fear, there was something steadier, resolve. Trembling but real. A line inside her had been drawn, and she was beginning to realize which side she stood on. I'll be there, she whispered, when it happens. I nodded, feeling something settle inside me. Calm and rooted. We sat together in silence for a few moments, the air heavy with truth and unspoken worry. That night, Naomi came to me again, quiet, solemn, more serious than any 6-year-old should be. She crawled into bed with her blanket and didn't say a word about cartoons or snacks. She just nestled against me like she used to, back when she thought the moon followed us home. I couldn't sleep, she whispered. Mommy and Daddy were talking again. My chest went tight. I waited. They think you're not thinking right, she said. Daddy said if you don't sign the papers, he'll tell your doctor your brain is broken. The words dropped into the darkness like dust, soft but suffocating. I felt my hands turn cold. I didn't speak. Naomi went on, her voice like a hush wrapped in worry. He said doctors believe grown-ups. I closed my eyes. That didn't help. My thoughts clattered through the memories, the odd looks, the subtle corrections, the way Celeste would laugh when I paused mid-sentence, as if I were already fading. Naomi rolled toward me, solemn and still. I don't think your brain is broken. I don't either, I said gently, brushing her hair from her forehead. Her eyes searched mine. Too wise for 6. Are they going to make you leave? No, sweetheart, I said with a calm I barely held. They can't make me do anything I don't want to. She tucked her head under my arm again. I held her close, staring at the ceiling, but I was somewhere else entirely, in a future I hadn't let myself imagine. One where the people I raised might take my name off everything I built. And do it with paperwork, while calling it love. They weren't just trying to control me. They were preparing to erase me. Silently. Legally. With pens and documents and witnesses who wouldn't know better. That night, Naomi slept peacefully. I did not. But I remembered something Robert once said. Just a month before his heart gave out. Promise me, Iris, if it ever comes down to choosing between being nice and being safe, choose safe. So the next morning, I picked up the phone. I called Margot. And this time, I didn't hesitate. If this moment struck something in your heart, maybe reminded you of a quiet strength you carry or someone you love, consider subscribing. I tell stories like these for those who've lived enough to know, sometimes surviving means being ready before the storm hits. Naomi was spending the night at her friend's house, conveniently out of the way. We had just finished our salads when Celeste set down her fork with a kind of rehearsed gentleness. Mom, she began, her voice feigning care. There's something we've been meaning to talk to you about. I nodded, keeping my face as unreadable as possible. Well, she continued, we've just noticed that things seem a little overwhelming lately. The house, the bills, everything. Vincent added, we've been thinking it might be time for us to help out more. Just to ease some pressure. Celeste reached into her tote and pulled out a manila folder. I saw it coming before it even touched the table. These are just some simple documents, she said lightly, as if she were offering me a recipe. Power of attorney stuff. Nothing changes unless you want it to. It's just, in case. I picked up the folder. Flipped through a few pages. My eyes passed over the words without reading them. My hands shook ever so slightly as I set them down again. Celeste leaned in, voice softened like butter in a warm room. There's no pressure, Mom. We just care about you. We want you protected. I nodded again, staring at the folder like it weighed more than it did. I'll need some time, I murmured, vague, non-committal, and perfectly safe. Beneath the flickering candlelight, angled discreetly between the breadbasket and the salt shaker. My phone recorded every word. Deidre wouldn't look at me. I didn't blame her. Vincent reached across to refill my water glass with the kind of practiced efficiency you'd reserve for someone halfway to helpless. And Celeste? She took my hand and squeezed it as though she were offering comfort, when what she'd really just handed me was my quiet erasure in paper form. After dinner, I smiled. I thanked them. I told them I'd think it over. Then I walked calmly upstairs, and locked the door behind me. By the next morning, I had an appointment with a lawyer. And by that afternoon, I was sitting across from a woman named Marissa Chin in a law office Margaret had insisted I call. She shook my hand firmly, no soft tones. No condescension, just sharp eyes and a legal pad. I trusted her the moment she didn't speak to me like I was fragile. I gave her everything, the dinner recording, Celeste's text, a list of bank accounts, and my current will. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving smoothly across a spiral notebook. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You're not paranoid, you're prudent." We rewrote my will that very afternoon. I didn't change the beneficiaries, each child still received an equal share, but we added language. Strong, clear clauses that protected my independence and detailed exactly what would happen if anyone dared to challenge my mental capacity. I revoked an old medical proxy Celeste had once pressured me into signing. Instead, I named Deidre as co-decision maker, with specific stipulations. If she declined, control would pass to my lawyer, not to any other family member. When I explained my choice, Marissa raised an eyebrow. She hesitated, I said, but she didn't lie. That counts for something. Next, I called the bank, changed passwords, added two-factor verification, removed Celeste from an old shared access line she hadn't used in years. I closed the savings account Robert and I had once kept for emergencies, and opened a new one in my name alone. When I got home that evening, Margot was waiting. She had her usual iced tea in one hand and that look on her face, the one that said, "I told you so," but was kind enough not to speak it aloud. Instead, she slid a folder across the table. "I printed transcripts from your phone recording," she said, in triplicate. We worked until the light faded from the windows, labeling, sorting, sealing envelopes. One copy went into the back of the spice rack, another into the bottom drawer of my writing desk, the third into the small safe behind Robert's old photo. Before bed, I stood quietly at Naomi's doorway and watched her sleep, one hand curled beneath her cheek. The quiet rise and fall of her breath steady and innocent. The house was still, but something in the air had shifted. Next time, they wouldn't catch me off guard. 2 weeks later, the petition arrived. Celeste had filed for legal guardianship, citing concerns about my memory, my judgment, and what she called increased dependence. She'd attached a letter, vague, self-serving, signed by Vincent. There was even a fabricated list of supposed incidents, none of which had ever happened. But I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. What I felt was clarity. Candle, if you've ever had to stand your ground quietly, to protect your dignity without raising your voice, this story is for you. Subscribe for more stories of quiet resilience. And share this with someone who may need the reminder, you're not alone. Marissa moved swiftly. We compiled everything, my updated medical evaluation, notarized bank records, the dinner recording, even a statement from Naomi's teacher confirming I had picked her up every single day. On time. We had facts, dates, documentation, enough to sink the entire petition before it ever touched a judge's bench. We had dates, details, and a mountain of documentation, enough to sink their petition before it ever reached the judge's bench. Deidre sat beside me in the courtroom, her shoulders drawn up like she was holding something fragile and important. When she was called to testify, her voice only trembled once. She asked for help. She said, "I didn't give it then, but I will now." Celeste never looked at me. Her gaze stayed locked on the polished wood of the defense table. Hands clenched so tightly that the knuckles turned bone white. Vincent hovered close, his presence silent, deferring, as always, letting her lead the charge. When it was my turn, I rose to my feet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't hurl blame. I spoke simply, plainly, with the kind of quiet strength that comes only from survival. I didn't say anything to humiliate them, just the truth, enough for the court to see that I understood exactly who I was, and what was mine. The judge didn't need much time. He denied the guardianship petition in full. I saw it hit Celeste like a tide. No tears, just a sudden, hollowing realization. The fight they'd started was lost. But the damage they had done, that would take much longer to fade. That evening, I sat in the backyard garden alone, watching the gold light slope across the last of the tomato vines. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself wonder, what would it mean to begin again? The house sold faster than I expected. It's got good bones, the agent told me. I smiled. I'd spent a lifetime holding those bones together, even after Robert was gone. Packing was quiet work, intimate, sorting a lifetime into boxes, his cufflinks, Naomi's finger paintings, old tea tins that still held the ghost of cinnamon. I moved into a small cottage on the edge of a senior community just outside of town. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Sunlight danced through every window. Clean lines, soft air, no dry cleaning receipts dropped on counters, no whispered assumptions that I'd pick up dinner or remember things I was never told. I planted tomatoes in the raised bed out back. Robert would have teased me for crowding them, said I never gave anything room to breathe. They came up anyway, slow, stubborn, like me. Naomi visits every weekend. She brings little stories, crayon drawings, bits of her day like petals. She always checks the plants, calls them our garden. I let her. Deidre comes too, sometimes. We don't talk about the courtroom. We don't have to. She brings coffee and quiet eyes. She sits across from me while the kettle hums. That's enough. Celeste hasn't called. Vincent hasn't either. I'm not waiting. These days, I take long walks most mornings. Sip tea without urgency. Read books uninterrupted. Some days, the only voices I hear are the birds and the woman at the front gate. And those are good days too. Because I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not someone orbiting the edge of a family that forgot how to see me. I'm me, whole, present, seen. And when Naomi wraps her little arms around me and says, "You're my favorite person, Grandma," I believe her. Because for the first time in a long while, I know I'm worth being chosen. When I told Iris's story, I had to pause more than once, not because I couldn't continue, but because something in my chest tightened. I've read hundreds of stories, but there's something deeply quiet and painfully real in every gesture and decision Iris made. There were no dramatic outbursts, no slammed doors, just a woman, pushed gently to the edges of her own home, who stood up with quiet strength and reclaimed her name, her dignity, and her place. This story made me think about the mothers, the grandmothers, the women who've spent a lifetime giving, only to be quietly overlooked or dismissed. But Iris didn't fight with cruelty. She didn't turn bitter. She chose clarity. And to me, that is the bravest kind of strength. If you're listening and you recognize a part of yourself in this story, please remember, you have the right to protect your worth. You don't have to raise your voice to be heard. You just have to stop letting them make you silent. I created Lynn Remembers for stories like this, stories that refuse to be forgotten. Voices that deserve to be heard. Right finger if this story touched something in you. Please consider subscribing, not just to hear more heartfelt stories, but to remind yourself that there is a community here, ready to listen. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'm Lynn, and I'll keep remembering, for all of us who were once made to feel invisible.